Miriam, can you mute yourself, please? I'm not able to do it on this end. Miriam? Thanks, Miriam. If everybody can remember to mute and turn off their cameras, that would be great, and then we can just speak. Thank you. Please, as you come in, remember to mute yourself. Kelly, if you can mute and turn off your video. Thank you. Kelly, can you? Thank you. Excellent.
Huh?
Just a reminder, we're asking everyone to please close your videos, turn your videos off as this is being recorded. Only the presenters should be viewed, and asking everyone to make sure that your microphones are on mute.
No. It's being recorded too. That's why.
Can we please have everyone mute their microphones? Thank you. Okay, it's 2:01. We're going to get started in just one more minute. We have other people that are joining. For those that are with us, thank you so much for being asked again that you have your off and that your the microphones are muted. Please mute yourself.
See, understanding the differences between crisis schooling and homeschooling.
Catherine, can you please mute your microphone? Thank you.
Hi, everybody. This is Melissa Rosenberg with Howard County Autism Society. We're delighted to be presenting the CCAC today of Howard County. And thank you all for being here. It's been a popular topic. I want to remind you again, please mute yourselves, turn off your video. We are recording it. Then we can all hear. And I'm going to turn it over to introduce our speakers and get us started. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. We're delighted to offer this with the partners, the Howard County School Systems, CPAC, as well as Disability Rights Before we get started, again, just some general housekeeping rules. Everyone should be muted except for our guest speakers. All videos should be off except for our speakers. We are recording this webinar, so if you don't want your picture on the top of it, we do ask you to make sure your video is off. Questions should be posted to the chat box. I'll be monitoring the chat box throughout the presentation, and any questions posted there we will try to address as time permits. I hope is that we've already addressed the majority of questions submitted with registration. We're hearing that we're getting a lot of feedback, so I'm going to ask everybody to please mute, everybody, to please mute. Take one moment to go ahead and mute your audio. Okay, is that better? Okay, let's try again. Again, if you're coming in, please turn your phone or computer to mute. We're getting an awful lot of feedback. Those calling in by phone, please turn your phone to mute. Okay. Hopefully this is better. So recent chatter on your Facebook group pages. It sounds, are we still having issues? If you're calling in on phone, I don't have the number in front of me, but we need you to please mute your phone. We have an awful lot of feedback. Okay. So recent chatter on many of our Facebook pages has indicated that parents are very curious about homeschooling in light of continued school building closures and the virtual learning start to our school year. While homeschooling is not uncommon and certainly a preference for many families, it is a decision that requires forethought, understanding of regulation, research, planning, and paperwork. Our goal in this presentation is to explain the differences between crisis schooling, which we've also heard referred to as school at home or at home learning, isolation schooling, virtual learning, remote learning, and all of those, and the difference between those and traditional homeschooling. We'll also share information about home and hospital teaching, homebound placement. Okay, am I being heard or not? Leslie, can you hear me okay?
It's Trish. It's very hard to
I can hear you, and I just muted, but it doesn't sound any different if I mute or unmute.
Yeah.
This is Trish. It's very hard to hear you, Beth.
It is very hard?
Yes, we're still getting feedback from somewhere.
Okay, I can't see who is not. Jackie DeBella, can you please mute? I'm sorry to call you guys out, but I don't know how else to do this. We have several call-ins from phone lines. I can't see the phone numbers. Please mute your phones. Steve Parker, please mute your computer. Deborah Vo, please mute your computer. Francine, please mute your computer. Jennifer Grimaldi, please mute your computer. Kate Blue.
It seems to be better now, Beth.
Okay, I think we're getting everyone. I'm sorry that we're not able to control that ourselves to be able to just mute everyone. So let's just try again. I'm just gonna kind of go right to it. We know there's a lot of concern about virtual learning, and we're hearing a lot of people, a lot of parents say, well, I'm just gonna pull my child out of school and do homeschooling. And we wanna make sure that parents understand what's involved with that. And we wanna make sure that parents understand the differences between school at home through virtual learning and traditional homeschooling. We're also going to talk a little bit about home and hospital teaching or home placement and what that is and how students found eligible. So as we move into the months ahead, the school system's plans on how instruction is to be delivered and how services are to be provided will take shape. There are still many decisions to be made, vetted, and shared. This presentation is not meant to address specifically the Department of Special Education's plans for this first semester of school. Hopefully we'll offer a webinar on that once the details are finalized. But for now, our goal is to provide parents with information that may help them as they make decisions about homeschooling for their children. So I'm pleased to introduce our two guest speakers, Seid Margolis and Patricia Gunshore. Leslie is a national recognized expert in special education and managing attorney at Disability Rights Maryland. She and DRM have collaborated with the Howard County Autism Society for years, and we cannot be more grateful for Leslie's guidance and support. Patricia Gunshore is the newly named Coordinator of Compliance, Non-Public Services, and Family Support with Howard County School System. She served in the Office of Superintendent since coming to Howard County in 2017. We truly appreciate Patricia's participation today. So with that, let's get started with our webinar. Melissa, can you advance the slide? So how do we even get to this topic of school at home versus homeschooling? Let's quickly review. On March 12th, the State Superintendent of Schools closed Maryland schools for in-person student instruction and extracurricular activities in response to COVID-19. Subsequent orders extended the physical closure through the end of the 2019-2020 school year, and in Howard County, the school system extended the closure through summer school and ESY. And just last week, the superintendent proposed to the Board of Education a fully virtual first semester of academic instruction until January 28th. Can you advance the slide, please, Melissa? Throughout the presentation, we will include questions that have already been asked. This is one of the most common we received and one of the most frequently posted. Obviously, still lots of unknowns for every local school system in the state, how special education services will be delivered, whether there will be any in-person services, whether children can enter the school buildings for specialized small group or one-on-one services, whether pairs or tutors will be available, and the list goes on. Until the school system clarifies its plan in the weeks ahead and gets the necessary approvals from the Maryland State Department of Education, we know parents are anxious and worried. Ms. Gunshore, can you please let us know if parents can expect something different or more of the same?
So we are still in the planning stages of developing the services for the fall. Melissa, can you please advance the slide? But things will be significantly more rigorous than they were in the spring. Some of the major changes, which you've probably already noticed, is the calendar adjustment. We start school later on September 8th so that teachers have more time to receive professional development and prepare for a fully virtual learning. Additionally, more Chromebooks were secured to ensure that all students and staff have access. And one of the major scheduling changes is the 4x4 schedule for middle and high school. We will have additional live synchronous learning coupled with asynchronous assignments. And there is a full day of asynchronous learning for all students. There is dedicated time for additional support for students in the schedule and daily social emotional learning lessons, or SEL. On the elementary side, students will receive 1 hour of synchronous English language arts and math services daily. And when I refer to the word daily, I mean 4 days per week, because if you have seen the schedule, you will notice that there is 1 day a week for professional learning for staff, as well as provision of additional supports for our students. So again, elementary, 1 hour of synchronous English language arts and math daily, and 1 hour of synchronous support daily. There are 2 hours of related arts and 2 hours of content weekly, and Wednesday is the time for provision of small group supports. On the middle and high school level, there are synchronous supports 2 times a day. Those are 2 support sessions a day, daily. There is social emotional learning daily, and there is synchronous instruction of classes with asynchronous assignments for all of the content, the 4 content areas. In the high school, there will be additional synchronous flex time for students to meet with teachers, provision of social emotional learning, and relationship building.
Thank you, Trish. Okay, another question we're throwing right up front is that aside from health and safety concerns, many parents are asking, what do I do if distance learning is not possible for my child due to his disability? I'm anxious about being held accountable if he regresses or does not participate. Leslie, can you please respond to this? Leslie, can you please advance the slide?
Sure. So I think there are two pieces to this. The first question, what my child didn't benefit from distance learning, what can I do? We know that there are children who just simply cannot effectively learn when they're sitting in front of a computer. We know that that's not possible. They need an actual person to support them. They need actual face-to-face instruction. We know that there are parents who are not in a position to be able to support their children's learning. So, our feeling is there's a difference between closing schools and doing everything online and potentially doing some in-person services. We know that through the autism waiver, there are children who have gotten face-to-face in-person services even during these past few months. We think that there are options that they can get discussed. But I want to talk about this accountability piece, because the accountability is on the school system to ensure that your child gets free appropriate public education. It is not your responsibility as your child's parent to provide that free appropriate public education. If your child regresses or your child's not able to participate, it is not a reflection on you as a parent. It's important for you to document how your child has done over these past few months or how your child does moving forward, but the responsibility is on the IEP team to ensure that your child receives a free appropriate public education. And so if your child cannot benefit from virtual learning, then you should be asking for an IEP meeting to talk about what kinds of alternatives might be possible. And
One more. Sorry.
Yeah, and so let me just also say, because it was on the previous slide, that if you choose to withdraw your child from, if you're feeling as, okay, fine, this didn't work, I'm just going to take my child out of the school system and homeschool, you become responsible for educating your child. There are requirements through the State Department of Education. Your child is no longer entitled to that free appropriate public education that the school system has to provide. You become fully responsible for educating your child in a way that is not the case when your child is part of the school system. So we can unpack that a little more later. So it is really the IEP team's responsibility to ensure that your child gets a free appropriate public education. And you really should be, if you're able to keep documentation of how your child's done and whether your child's regressing or in what areas your child's regressing or your child's refusal to participate, that's all important information. And I would encourage you to keep those records and then bring that to the IEP team.
Okay, you can advance, Melissa. Okay, so now that we know about the school's responsibility, let's talk about school at home, distance learning versus traditional homeschooling. What's the difference? Leslie? Melissa, you can advance.
Yes. So if you could advance the slide. So, traditionally in school, it is teacher-led. The teacher is preparing lessons and is leading the teaching. The requirements are set by the teacher. Grades are determined by the teacher. And when schools reopen, instruction will return to the physical school building. Technology is provided by the school system. Computers and Wi-Fi, if families don't have it, will be provided by the school system. Assistive technology is required for any child who needs it to access education and benefit from education. It is the full, free, appropriate public education that's required by federal law. And the State Department of Education has issued guidance making clear that children are entitled, even during this period of time, to a free, appropriate public education, that the IEP is what governs, what rules. The method of delivery may be different, but the fundamental right to a free, appropriate public education continues. And so for kids who may not be able to benefit from that remote learning, the team has to figure out what a viable alternative is. And it could be contracting with people who are willing to come to a home, or it could be finding an alternate location, or making schools open in a limited way for kids who really need an in-person. I mean, there are lots of potential options. So meals, healthcare, and school-based clinics. I mean, there are all the services. If you can advance to the next slide, there are all those services that families are used to getting from the school system, special education related services, that fundamental right, as I said, the fundamental right to a free, appropriate public education, supplementary aids and services, program modifications and accommodations, all those things that help your child benefit, access education and benefit from education. And the intent, according to state guidance, was that during these past few months, continuity of learning plan would be simply an amended IEP that would provide free, appropriate public education, but just in distance learning. And to the extent that it doesn't, your child would potentially be entitled to additional or different or compensatory services once an assessment was made of where your child did not make progress or went backwards. Next slide.
Okay, so let's look more closely at traditional homeschooling. To highlight some very distinct differences between crisis schooling and teaching during the pandemic to traditional homeschooling. There's some very important things to consider before making a decision. Next slide. And if you are joining us, please make sure your phones are on mute, especially those that are calling in by phone. Thank you. So if a parent this is the number one question that we received. If a parent withdraws their child from public school, can the child still receive IEP services, speech therapy, or other related services? Leslie, I'm going to ask you to answer that. And Melissa, can you please advance?
Yeah, and the answer, the very quick answer to that is no, not through the school system, other than child find, identifying children who may have disabilities and may need special education, which is a requirement for all children living within the jurisdiction. There is no entitlement to special education and services if a parent homeschools, because what that parent is doing by homeschooling is withdrawing the child from the school system. And so the school system has no further obligation to that parent. And if that child's not enrolled in public school and getting special education services, that child will not be eligible for the autism waiver. It's really, and the parent becomes responsible for providing all education services to their child, and has to abide by the requirements that the Maryland State Department of Education sets forth for homeschooling. So it's really a decision to take very, very seriously. People do homeschool for a variety of reasons, but it's particularly for families who have children with disabilities, is not a decision to take lightly, because it is not like a child in a non-public school where there might be some right to some service. You are withdrawing your child completely from the school system, and there is no entitlement. So technology would have to be returned, textbooks have to be returned. There's no relationship anymore with the local school system. And I don't know if there's anything that Trish wants to add to that.
So historically, Howard County may have provided some services while a student was homeschooling, but it's a decision that we will have to revisit again each year, and we will be revisiting that. If we follow the guidance that Leslie just referred to, we're not required to provide any of that service.
Hey, Trish, this is Lynn Muller on the line. If you have questions about homeschooling or they come up in the chat room, I can certainly address them from the State Department.
I mean, a local school system can always choose to do more than what the law requires. And so Howard County could always choose to provide services to children who are homeschooled, but they don't have to. So as the lawyer here, I'm just sort of laying out that there is no legal right to get services from the school system. But if Howard County chose to provide services, that would be fantastic for anybody who chooses to homeschool their child. That would be great. But there's not a legal obligation on the part of the school system to do that.
Leslie, can you please repeat with regard to the autism waiver? Can you please repeat why children who are withdrawn from the public school system are no longer eligible for the autism waiver?
Because the autism waiver requires, as a condition of eligibility, that a child be enrolled in a school program. So that would require a child to be in a public school program or in a program that's being funded by the public school system. And I'm not an expert on the autism waiver, but that is my understanding of eligibility requirements.
And I will add that you have to have at least 15 hours of special education instruction.
Education, yes, a week, yes.
Okay. Have you hit this slide that's up, Leslie?
I'm sorry?
Have you already talked to the slide that's up on your
Yes.
screen? Okay. Melissa, can you advance, please?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we've made pretty clear that, if you homeschool, you're withdrawing your child. So sports, extracurriculars, there's not an entitlement to participate. Transition programs, all the things that your child would be able to participate in if your child were in the public school system. You can't take for granted that. And in fact, I mean, unless the county chose to allow homeschool children to participate, your child would not have access to.
Okay, great. Thank you, Leslie. Okay, so now I'd like to turn this over to Trish and invite her to discuss the county's policy on homeschooling, as well as some of the Maryland state regulations on homeschooling.
So homeschooling is a choice that all parents have, and Howard County Public Schools provides parents who make this choice with guidance and support on how to begin the process, how to follow the mandated check-ins, and how to return to HCPSS should that be something that you desire. You can go to the next slide. Regardless of whether your child has special needs, basics, traditional homeschooling, also called home instruction programs, are as follows. These programs are parent-directed, meaning the parent is guiding their child's learning, and the parent chooses the topics that they teach, but they are within mandatory subject areas. There can be an extended period of time, or it is for an extended period of time. So it really is intended to be for an entire grade or more, and not for months of closure only. And as Leslie alluded to earlier, all the financial costs are the parent's responsibility, and that includes materials, textbooks, technology, etc. You can go to the next slide. There are many regulations that govern homeschooling, and in particular, HOMAR has a set of regulations around homeschooling, and some of them are listed here on this slide. First is that the parents have to notify the school system that they are intending to homeschool their child, and they have to give that notice 15 days prior to when they want to begin. And then provide that notification again on an annual basis. Home instruction is for students age 5 through 18, and it has to be reviewed and supervised by the local school system or by a certified non-public entity. So there is a review process each year. Attendance is mandatory and in congruence with Maryland compulsory attendance laws. And there has to be regular instruction, and the courses that Leslie, they're asking if you would mute.
Yeah, sorry.
There has to be regular instruction in these courses that are listed here: English, mathematics, science, social studies, art, music, health, and physical education. And those subject areas have to be offered as frequently as they are offered in the public school system. And as we know, that is different for different grades. You go to the next slide. There is a portfolio review. The parents have to maintain a portfolio of instructional materials, and that review happens the first and second semester, one time during the first and one time during the second semester. And those reviews last 20 minutes long. They are conducted with employees of Howard County Public School System. You're provided with a review team that will review your materials. After you've had 4 consecutive successful reviews, then you only have to do 1 review each spring. And students are most welcome to attend their reviews. Melissa, if you advance.
Okay, can a tutor or someone other than a parent or guardian be hired to teach a child who is engaged in a home instruction program? Trish?
So while the parent or guardian is considered the primary teacher in a homeschooling program, homeschooling is not limited to the parent or guardian themselves. The parent may design a program that utilizes a variety of instructors and a variety of locations. If they have people who have a particular knowledge in a topic area, they can utilize someone for just that unit. But ultimately, the parent is the person responsible for the instruction.
Okay, do home instructors need to be certified teachers or certified to deliver home instruction? Trish? Next slide.
No, they do. Home instruction does not require that the parent, guardian, or other instructors are certified teachers in order to deliver that instruction. But again, the parent or guardian is considered that main provider and is ultimately responsible for complying with all the regulations.
Okay, next slide, Melissa. Up the other direction. There we go. Keep going. Can I withdraw my child from school now and then re-enroll her when schools reopen? Trish?
Next slide, Melissa. So one thing we must understand is that compulsory attendance laws indicate that the child who lives in Maryland between the ages of 5 and 18 are required to attend school the entire year. Some of the exemptions to that is if a child is receiving their instruction usually taught in the public school through a home instruction program, and or if the child has completed that home instruction program verified by the local school system or a supervising entity. If we go to the next slide, thank you. The parent has the right to withdraw their child from the public school at any time period, but if they choose then to re-enroll their child, there is a process that they have to follow in order to re-enroll them in the public school. We'll go to the next slide, Melissa. That process includes the parent contacting their assigned school to re-enroll their child. And that school has to make a determination about placement. So the child doesn't automatically go back from which they came. A placement decision is made by the administration of Howard County Public Schools, including that their assigned school. HCPSS also will examine the credits if a student is a high school age student to determine what, if any, credits they earned while on home instruction. And the school system can require that the child participate in standardized tests, interviews, or exams to determine the placement upon returning.
Trish, can you clarify placement?
So placement just means what school the child attends. So you can't assume that the child is going back to the school from which they came once you place them on home instruction. For example, some of the schools that in the homeschool that they were enrolled in, some of the students might have been redistricted to a new school. If they were in a particular program in one school, that program might not exist in that school anymore, but it might be located in a different building. So you can't just assume they're going back to the school they came from. The school has to look at things like enrollment based on redistricting, and they have to look at placements into specialty programs.
Great, thank you. Next slide. So if I withdraw my child from public school, does his IEP go back into effect when I re-enroll him? Or is there a process for getting his IEP reinstated? Trish?
So there is a process for that. The IEP team must meet to look at any current documents that might be available or see how old documents were from when they were enrolled in Howard County Public School System. The IEP team might make the determination that the student needs updated assessments and that the IEP itself might need to be revised. So you, again, can't assume that the child will just return and resume back on the IEP that they left with. So initially, the IEP team will schedule a meeting and then make any decisions about changes to the IEP, assessments needed, et cetera.
Okay, next slide. Does the child receive a Maryland High School diploma upon completion of his or her home program?
Next slide, please. So if a child is homeschooled, the student does not receive a Maryland High School diploma. But if they transfer from homeschooling upon reentry, like I shared earlier, a credit check is done to determine which credits that they earned while being homeschooled. And then the school will determine what additional credits they need to fulfill to ensure that all graduation requirements are completed for the public school before receiving a Maryland High School diploma.
Okay, thank you. Melissa, next slide. So let's turn now to the home and hospital teaching. Home and hospital teaching, how's it different from homeschooling and who is eligible? Leslie, can you please speak to this?
Sure. So if a child is unable to participate in a school program because of a physical illness or they have an emotional disability, that they're in an emotional crisis, they may be entitled to home and hospital teaching, which is time limited and is for kids in emotional crisis is time limited to 60 days. For kids who are unable to attend school because of an illness that prevents them from going to school, there is not that same time limit. But in order to qualify for home and hospital teaching, there needs to be medical documentation. There's medical certification. The hours tend to be limited. The law requires a minimum of 6 hours a week. That often is looked at as a maximum, but it is possible to get some additional time. And generally, I think people, because it's one-to-one services, the thought is if you're getting intensive one-to-one services, that's worth a certain number of additional hours of classroom time because it's more concentrated. But as we think about kids who, if schools reopen, may not be able to return because of their health conditions, we would not necessarily look to home and hospital teaching as the response, because it doesn't provide the full number of hours of pre-appropriate public education, doesn't fully implement the IEP. And we would be looking for full IEP implementation, but just not in that school setting. But it's because people often use the words homeschooling or home teaching interchangeably, we wanted to make sure that the difference between home and hospital teaching, which is a time-limited service provided by the school system for kids who are unable to attend school or in emotional crisis, versus homeschooling when you withdraw your child from the school system and you are responsible for educating your child.
Great, thank you. Okay, next slide. I think this, oh, I'm sorry, Leslie. Do you want to address this?
Yeah, so as I said, home and hospital is a limited number of hours each week. It's a minimum of 6, but it's hard to get more than maybe 10 hours. And home and hospital teachers are sometimes not certified teachers. Sometimes they may be retired teachers, sometimes not. But there's not a guarantee that you will get a certified teacher.
Great, thank you. Okay.
Let's say a certified special education teacher. They will be certified teachers. They just may not be certified special education teachers.
Okay, next slide, Melissa. I think this brings us to our questions portion. I am going to, again, remind everyone and invite you, if you have specific questions, to go ahead and put them in the chat box, and I'll be pulling them for our speakers. One question that was asked, and Leslie, if you can, again, address this, I know it was touched on earlier, is if parents feel that virtual learning is not going to work for their child, but they do not want to do homeschooling because they're both working and they can't take on that responsibility, is that when parents should go back to the IEP table and meet with the team and explain what should be pretty much on the agenda there?
Yes, I think that that's the point. Now that we know we're looking at increased time with schools closed, that it's an opportune time to request an IEP meeting and have a discussion with the team about what services can look like for your child. So it may be that that the Howard County's response is we're not going to send our staff into your home. We're not going to open our schools on a limited basis for services to kids. I don't know. Sounds like, the county is still figuring out what it's going to say or what it's going to do. But it might be possible if you are in the autism waiver, if you have providers, if you can find somebody who provides ABA services and that's what your child needs, or if you have somebody who can, if your child needs somebody to act as a one-to-one in order to facilitate your child's participation in synchronous learning, or to support your child in asynchronous learning, that if the team recognizes that those services are necessary, that says that we can't provide that person, that you can make a request that the county contract with that person, or that they reimburse you if you go out and you purchase those services privately. We would argue that that's part of what constitutes a free appropriate public education. If the school system agrees, if the IEP team agrees the service is required to provide a free appropriate public education that says that we can't provide it and you are able to secure it, then we would argue that you would have an argument for reimbursement, or an argument to ask the county to contract. And we think that that's something very eminently reasonable for for school systems to be looking at right now for those kids who really, truly cannot make educational progress without an actual human being to facilitate the learning process.
Great, thank you. Okay, so, and you spoke to this already. This was another question asked if a parent wanted to hire someone outside of, you know, an ABA therapist or another provider to come into the home, that is allowed to provide, you know, support for the child during the Google Meetup or the online learning. So I think we've addressed that question as well. Trish, some people are asking when we will know more about what the fall is going to look like. And I know all those decisions are being made. I'm not sure if you have a more specific timeline. I know a lot of things have to be approved by the state, and then they have to be, you know, approved by our Board of Ed and so forth. But if you have any information that you'd like to share to kind of let parents know, you know, what's coming, that would be helpful. And then if you could also speak to the expectation about continuity of learning plans. So just as when we went to the spring, anyone with an IEP had an individualized continuity of learning plan, is the assumption then that the students will have that same kind of amendment to their IEP as they head into the fall? Can you speak to that, Trish?
Sure. So as we know, the decision was just made less than a week ago that we will be going virtual for the first semester. So behind the scenes, the special education department is examining our options for the coming fall. And so those final documents have to be submitted to the Maryland State Department of Education by August 14th. So we can hope that any decision for the system, as well as the Department of Special Education, will be submitted on that date. And then, as you alluded to, the state has to review and approve those reports. So we are discussing, you know, different types of strategies or services that we might be able to provide to students. But again, all of that is prefaced on the safety of our students and our staff. And so we're examining all kinds of possibilities for the fall, but nothing is confirmed yet. And again, all based on what is safe for our students and staff. So, but additionally, in addition to what was provided in the spring, there will be additional interventions provided to our students. There is the additional time during the week where they'll be getting support from their staff in the separate sessions, but as well as support during the general education sessions, because teachers would be able, special educators would be able to provide some pull-out service during that time as needed. And then we'll also be looking again at the provision of our related services, which is going to look different than it looked in the spring, and be more direct for our students while being virtual. So I don't have an exact timeline. I can tell you that there are lots of discussions behind the scenes about what we might be able to do and which things we might be able to implement first. The second part of that question was the continuity of learning plans. So yes, parents can expect that there will be a new continuity of learning plan developed for the fall with each of the students. And the plan will contain the same elements as it contained in the spring, but it might look a little different just because we've changed the format. But yes, each student will receive a new continuity of learning plan for the fall.
Trish, we had a follow-up question, and Leslie as well, about the continuity of learning plan, and if parents feel that what was proposed in the spring didn't work, and if the same thing is proposed again, and that doesn't work, what then? I'm going to remind people that on our website, we have our previous presentation, which is what we spoke to about if it's not working, these are the things to do. So I would reference that, and we can provide a link to that. But Leslie, is there anything you want to highlight for parents about that discussion if they're unhappy with the proposed continuity of learning?
Yeah, so I come back to something I think I said at the beginning, which is that the State Department of Education guidance is pretty clear that we should be thinking about the IEP. So while a separate, I think the intent of that guidance was not to create a new document necessarily, but to modify or amend the IEP if it was needed in order to change the way that services were delivered, or if there were certain services that absolutely could not be delivered through distance learning to amend the IEP. But I think that what happened, and what parents should be careful to not let happen, because it will further dilute the IEP if it plays out this way again, is to move further away from the IEP by developing a new continuity of learning plan. So I think it's important to go back to the IEP that is in place, was in place, the IEP that would be governing if your child were in school, and start with that. And the governing question should be, is it possible to implement every piece of this IEP in a different way? And in asking that question, and if the answer is, well, no, we need an actual person to do this. This is not something that can be done through distance. It's not, it requires an actual person. And I think we come to what I said a moment ago. We look at, okay, if it can't be a Howard County person, can it be somebody Howard County contracts with? If I find a person, can you reimburse me for that? If I provide the service, can you reimburse me for that? You need to have those discussions and look at, is there really anything left when you finish that discussion that really truly cannot be implemented? And then modify the IEP. And if you want to call the modified or amended IEP a continuity of learning plan, that's fine. You can give it another name. But the danger in creating a new document is you pull things from the IEP, and what you end up with is a diluted document. And I think that guidance from the State Department of Education was very, very clear that there should be the full IEP implementation, or an amended IEP, and if there's a disagreement with the amended IEP, then parents can use the dispute resolution process. Or you can, before you even get there, have that IEP meeting, because you can amend an IEP without actually having an IEP meeting. So you can implement the IEP as is, but just in a different way because schools are closed. You can agree to amend the IEP and do that outside of an IEP meeting. If there's a disagreement, have an IEP meeting and see if you can come to an agreement. And if there's not, then you can use your dispute resolution processes.
Thank you, Leslie. And we are getting some specific questions about how to make this virtual learning, how to make the fall work for families. And I just want to remind you, that's not what this presentation is meant to be about. This presentation was really meant to explain the difference between virtual learning and traditional homeschooling. So those questions, we hope to have another webinar once we know more about Howard County specific plans and what's going to be provided, what the role of paras are going to be, how families can access additional support. Hopefully that will be another webinar. So those questions I'm not going to put forward right now, but we understand they weigh heavily on all of us as parents. We know that our children are not able to log on to a computer by themselves or participate by themselves. So I'm going to hold that one. One question, Trish, and I'm respectful of our time. I want to allow Stephanie Carr from our CCAC to just provide a few tips to parents on homeschooling. But before that, Trish, one question about the placement decision. Who makes that decision when a parent is re-enrolling the child? Who makes the decision on placement? Is it the administrator at the old school, person at the new school, or your team, or who is that in the school system?
So what the COMAR regulations say is that it's the responsibility of the superintendent to make that decision. Obviously, he is designating someone else to make that decision. If a student is a general education student, it would go back to the administration of the school, of their enroll at the school that they are to be enrolled in by their geographic region. If the student also has an IEP, then that school would consult with the Department of Special Education staff or the school's resource teacher to look at placement decisions.
Okay, great. Okay,
Placement doesn't, I don't want to equate placement with IEP placement.
right, exactly. Okay, Stephanie.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to make one more comment about your earlier question about if parents weren't happy with the spring, they might not be happy with the fall. Just by reiterating that the fall is going to look very different based on the slides we presented earlier, and just based on the general schedule for students. So we will have enhanced services in this virtual model for the fall. For example, there will be interventions provided, and there will be direct related services provided. And some of those things are already being provided during ESY. So it's something we started implementing for ESY and will continue into the fall.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to invite Stephanie Carr to join us now. Stephanie is co-chair of our Special Education Citizens Advisory Council. Special Education Community Advisory Council, something along those lines. So Stephanie, if you would like to come onto the screen and just give us a few of your top tips for parents who are seriously considering homeschooling.
Okay.
And feel free to turn your
Video
camera on.
but if everybody can hear me, that's great. I did homeschool for a year, child with multiple disabilities. So the main thing, it is manageable. There is tons of information out there, and that seems to be unmanageable, but it is manageable. Another point would be planning. Now, I'm a teacher by trade, so planning has always been in my repertoire, but especially with children with disabilities, mine has ADHD. Planning, in effect, always makes things a lot easier. But what I also learned, days aren't going to work. And if they don't work, you roll with it, and it isn't going to impact the education in the long run. Resources, there are a ton. We all know about the internet and everything that can come with it. All anybody needs to do is homeschooling in Maryland, and you'll get tons of websites. But there are specifics that I found extremely helpful. One was the Maryland Homeschoolers Association. Time for Learning is also an excellent website. Not only do they have their own curriculum, but they also have tons of general homeschooling information. And then Facebook groups. I found tons of activities, a homeschool music class, and any kind of tips on how to survive your first year of homeschooling. So those were the major ones.
Great, thank you. And on a forthcoming slide, I do have your contact information as well, Stephanie. So parents can reach out to her as a great resource as well. Melissa, can you advance the slide, please? Okay, so as we close our session today, I just want to remind everyone that the Howard County Autism website has all COVID-19 resources. That includes the State Department of Education's technical assistant bulletins on topics of great importance during this time, the Disability Rights Maryland guidance, school system updates. Parents Place of Maryland also has many resources available. And we also remind you that one-on-one IEP assistance is available. This is available free of charge from the Howard County Autism Society, from Parents Place of Maryland. Parents Place actually has a website where you go on and you pick your time to speak to somebody about your IEP issues. That's a wonderful offering. And then, of course, within the school system, we do have a family support and resource center, and we have two parents there that you may speak with as well. Melissa, can you go one more slide? There are, specific to this presentation, there is a technical assistance bulletin on home and hospital teaching on the MSDE website. And there is also a frequently asked questions, FAQ on home instruction in Maryland that's put out from MSDE as well. That's very helpful. And that's where a lot of this presentation was pulled from. There's another fact sheet for non-public entities registered with MSDE to supervise home instruction. That's listed those entities that you may work with to supervise. There's guidance on standardized testing and how homeschoolers can take advantage of that. And then there are parent guides for each of the grade levels, and including all the important high school classes. Next slide, Melissa. This is the contact information for Disability Rights Maryland. Next slide. We also have the Howard County Autism Society's information here. You can email me or contact the office and they can put you in touch with me. And then finally, our next slide is these are your contacts for CCAC. For Stephanie Carr just spoke, and Mai Hall is also the co-president or co-chair. So with that, I think that wraps up our presentation. I thank everyone for participating today. As we said, this has been recorded, and we also are going to add any questions that were not in the slides. We're going to add them to the end of this presentation, so you have the Q&A there as well. And this will be posted and sent to those that participated today so that you'll have a slide deck as well. I hope this visit has been helpful. Thank you so much for attending, and we look forward to our next webinar. Thank you, Leslie and Trish and Stephanie, for your participation.
Thank you, Beth. Thanks, Melissa. Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful.
Thank you.